Here on The Colour of Country Life, good to catch up with Wool Producers Australia CEO Jo Hall again. How are you, Jo?
I'm very well, thanks, Ricky. Thanks for having me.
Now, I was speaking to you, I believe you're in Melbourne at the moment. Some important meetings just to, I guess, get the heads together from the stakeholders about where things are heading for Australian wool.
Yes, we're down in Melbourne at the moment for what we call Wool Week, even though it goes for 2 days. And basically that's a culmination of the different sectors within the domestic supply chain where they come together and hold their meetings. So the brokers and the exporters and AWEX, for example, meet and we have an industry event. So it's a good chance to catch up with the supply chain and have a chat about what's happening in the industry at the moment.
And what's happening in the industry, we have talked with yourself and others, of course, about biosecurity, but just leaving that to a side for a moment, in those conversations, has biosecurity sort of pushed things to one side, or are there other important projects that are still ticking away?
Look, biosecurity is always a theme within the industry. Obviously, with recent events around foot and mouth disease being detected in Indonesia, there's currently a heightened focus on biosecurity, but that's one of the issues we'll be talking about. Another thing, I guess, related to biosecurity is the resumption of trade for South Africa with China following their foot and mouth disease incursion in April.
Yep, now that's an interesting one because of course Australia doesn't have foot and mouth disease, but I imagine there's lessons the industry would want to be able to apply should the worst happen and we did have an outbreak in terms of how quickly trade could resume.
Definitely. So South Africa had a foot and mouth disease incursion in 2019 where they saw the cessation of trade with China, and South Africa at the time put in a number of protocols, including heat treatment of wool to resume trade, which was accepted. So earlier this year, wool producers thinking about preparedness for Australia if we were to have an incursion of foot and mouth disease, decided to approach the South African industry to see if we could learn some lessons from their experience. Little did we know that they would then have another outbreak this year, which has seen them shut out of the market for around 5 months. So that resumption of trade, or the announcement of the resumption of trade, is very welcome for the broader wool industry on a global level. So the South Africans have been very receptive in terms of working with us and wanting to assist us in learning what we can do. And to that end, through the International Wool Textile Organisation, which is sort of the global wool group, wool producers have taken forward a proposal to look at trade protocols. This has been supported by South Africa and New Zealand and the Uruguay as well. So a working group has been formed to look at that over the coming months.
Just clarify for me, I haven't had a chance to check, but China itself is not foot and mouth disease free. But if that's true, this sort of illustrates the importance of your own nation being foot and mouth disease free, because it affects your export status regardless of the status in the receiving country.
That's correct. So China is not FMD free, but as an importing country, they can place whatever protocols that they see fit for their markets.
All right. Now, you're in Victoria at the moment, the home of, if you like, electronic traceability in sheep. It was applied by the state government there, and now the agriculture ministers have met about a month or so ago and said, let's somewhat copy that system, but there's lessons to be learned from how it's been applied there, I gather, before just rolling it out across the country.
Yes, so the Australian agricultural ministers, formerly known as AgMin, met back on the 20th of July, I believe, and there was agreement for a national rollout of electronic identification for sheep and goats across the country, which, wool producers' policy is quite clear. We are supportive of the implementation of EIDs for sheep, but that is contingent on a number of factors that, what we're focusing on here is traceability reform. We don't want to go down the path of just focusing on the device that is used for traceability, because we have to have the systems in place where states are all talking to each other, the database can handle the numbers of livestock from across Australia. So we're really pushing the fact that this is more than just EIDs or talk about the mandatory implementation of EIDs. This is about systems reform.
Now, on the cost of that, we've spoken with Sheep Producers Australia about this recently as well, but Ian Rowett, who's on the Sheep Industry Fund, he's the chair here in South Australia, mentioned he felt that there might be a cost burden that should be also shared with processors and possibly at the retail end of applying this electronic traceability. What are your views on that?
Look, that is entirely consistent with our policy. Again, we're very clear on that before we start talking about the devices, we need to develop or agree to an equitable cost-sharing agreement between industry, and that includes the different sectors of industry, including processors and also government. So that's not just for the establishment of this system, it's for the ongoing maintenance, because we know there will be ongoing costs, and what we don't want to see is the poor old growers having to cover all of those costs, because we do know that 9 times out of 10, those costs within the supply chain are passed down to the producer. So we certainly will be seeking agreement for equitable cost sharing.
Well, I gather in the end, whether it's animal welfare concerns that the traceability is driven by, or biosecurity concerns, the positives and negatives are shared by everyone in the wool sector, not just the growers.
Oh, definitely. I mean, going back to a helicopter view of biosecurity, if you will, biosecurity is in everybody's interest, and that includes the general public, because, as a trading nation, we have amazing market access because we have a really good, clean, green reputation globally. So we have to do everything to protect that because that benefits everybody, and including the broader economy.
Well, Jo Hall, Chief Executive Officer from Wool Producers, great chatting with you. We look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thanks very much, Ricky.